Welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Conrad Weaver, and I'm so grateful that you joined me today. Hey, just a quick reminder to all of us to check on someone you love today. Reach out, send them a text, send them a call. You just never know what that's going to do and what that'll do for someone who's maybe struggling. And you're going to make a lasting impact on your friend's life. So pick up the phone, give them a call, send them a text message, leave them a voicemail, just something to connect. We need to be connected, and you can play a role in that with your friend's life and with the people around you. It's an important thing to do. Let's make it a habit. Hey, today's episode is not just another conversation. It's really a life-saving story. My guest is veteran police officer Jason Sery. He's a man who's worn the badge for more than 26 years, nearly lost everything to the hidden weight of the job. Jason opens up with incredible vulnerability about his struggle with depression, burnout, and even a near suicide attempt while on a vacation with his family. But this isn't just a story of pain. It's a powerful story of redemption, grace, and recovery. And through it all, Jason's Christian faith remains at the center, not as a crutch, but as a compass that led him back from the edge. So whether you're a person of faith or not, I promise this episode has something important for you, because it's not just about belief and faith, it's about being human in one of the hardest jobs in the world. Jason speaks with honesty about the pressure of always having to be strong, the danger of suppressing trauma, and the healing that only comes when we stop pretending and start opening up. If you've ever felt alone, if you feel like you're the only one going through it, I need you to hear this. You are not alone. So I encourage you to stay with us all the way through, because this episode could be a lifeline someone listening needs right now. And that someone might even be you. So here's my conversation with Jason Sery. Well, Jason, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so glad we were able to connect and have you on the program today.
Thanks, Conrad. I appreciate that. Thanks for the invite.
So you are a police officer in the Portland area. Tell me a little bit about what you do there.
I came out here at the end of 1998 and started police work out here. I actually started my police career in Montana and was there for a couple years prior to that. And so I've been in the profession for a long time. About a third of the way through my career, I took a 3-year break and worked full-time in ministry at our church. But definitely sensed that I was called and equipped to be a police officer and made my way back. And with that break, I'm in about 26 years in this thing. And so it's a long time. It's a good job. It's a calling. It's a lot of work day to day.
You know, in some circles, kind of having those two things together, being a Christian, a believer, and being in law enforcement, seem incongruous. Talk about that and how your faith plays a role in your work.
No, I think that's a great question. That's a great point, because this job is a really unique one, and I know you've had other guests on that have talked about it as well. Is that there is a risk to this job with it consuming you, it becoming your purpose and your identity. And as a Christian, I know that's just not the case. My purpose and identity is as a Christian first. And those other things have to be second to that for life to be in the right process, for it to honor God and to be in the place I'm supposed to be. And it's really interesting, because that is sometimes that battle, that day-to-day battle with keeping that purpose in mind as a Christian, but keeping this job in the place it's supposed to be as well, because this job, like I said, will try to supersede that oftentimes.
Have you always understood that, or was that something that kind of came to you in the course of your career?
Interestingly enough, it's something from the beginning that was on my mind in a very conscious way. And I haven't lived that out perfectly by any means. It's like I said, it is a battle. And there are seasons of life that try to put different pressures on and get that off course. But I did know that from the beginning. And it's interesting, because that goes all the way back to my very first shift. And there's a time when I present, sometimes I'll show a picture of that first shift or leading up to that first shift. And it's a picture of me in uniform about 2 hours before ever going out in a police car with family and friend around me, and they're praying for me. And so that was kind of the catalyst to this career. And I believe that had a huge impact on where I am today. But that was where it was distinctly kind of consciously in my mind.
Mm-hmm. And to be clear, just because you are a Christian doesn't keep you from having the effects of the job and being impacted by the things that you experience, right?
That's 100% correct. And I would say that that was probably something I was the most naive to going into this. I talk about the great rewards and great costs of this job. And I would say that that was probably, if I could put a number one on it, that was it. That I thought in some way that my faith is strong and that I do believe that that's central and that that's my identity and purpose, that somehow that would mitigate at a level, naively mitigate the risks and the cost of the job and the traumatic effects. And it didn't. In fact, it got to a point where I was very, very consumed by some of these aspects of the job to where it was affecting me and not even aware that it was affecting me the way it was, and fell into some deep, deep depression. And eventually I got to the point where I did try to end my life.
What was leading up to that, what were the things that kind of brought you to that point of like, I can't do this anymore, and I want to end my life? What were the things that really stood out to you? If and share what you want. Don't go into anything you don't want to go into. So.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I know there's details that sometimes are appropriate and not appropriate for different conversations. I would say there's a couple things. One being that I started to let feelings over truth become kind of my mantra, that how I was feeling, how I was interpreting things overall became my truth. And that's just not the reality of life. We have to really, feelings are good, emotions are good, but oftentimes they're not rooted in truth. And typically, how I started to act is I would let some of the emotions and feelings of the job and the personal life and all these different things that come into our lives start to drive different narratives. And I was boxing up and packaging and shoving off deep inside or onto a shelf some of the traumatic experiences I had had, some of the accumulation of the stress of this job. And then the second part of that was not only my own direct and kind of vicarious trauma that I was experiencing just going through this career, but it was also being on a peer support team, having this heart as a Christian for others. I believe our mission is to love God and love others every day, and taking on burdens that were never meant for me to carry. As I would meet with officers from around our area and had good connections with them, as I would lead a police men's Bible study with police officers and first responders, and they would share different things, I would take on those burdens inappropriately. Rather than passing them to appropriate resources, counselors, pastors, other resources, I would try to internalize those and come up with solutions. And that's a danger, because as police and first responders, we really are fixers, and we see a problem, we want to help, and that's kind of a great quality, but it also can be an enemy to us as well. And that's what I started to have, both me not processing things well, and then taking on burdens that were never meant for me to carry. And those things became crushing. And when my faith, even though central, wasn't changing how I felt, I started to believe some certain things and some lies, and really got to a point where I wasn't in the right headspace at all.
So what was the thing that got you out of that? What got you through that time in your life when you obviously didn't end your life, and we're thankful for that? What got you through that?
Well, I have to say, I wondered if you'd have that question. I 100% attribute it to, it is God's grace. It is 100% God's grace. There is nothing that I can say, I just decided differently or anything like that. Mine was very subtle. I think there's some very overt acts of suicide. And we know, and kind of I've seen your guests on here, we know that suicide's kind of that extreme. We know first responders are all through this spectrum of difficulty and struggle with different things. And depending on how you're wired, or the different experiences you've had, or just even all those different components that you've had guests on talk about, it can get you to different points. I would have told you at the beginning of this thing, even halfway through this thing, I never, ever would have got to that extreme. And it's interesting I did. And for me, mine was very subtle. I got to that point of hopelessness. I got to that point of letting feelings and emotions dictate every single part of my life and my outlook on life. And for me, it was on a vacation with my family, and I was going to make the attempt to. It was out in Hawaii, and I was going to make the attempt to swim out in the ocean and never come back. Mm-hmm. And I made it pretty far out there before God turned me around miraculously and by His grace. I'm thankful, like you said, thankful we can have this conversation. Mm-hmm. But again, that was kind of the turning point. It didn't change right then when I went back to shore. But that was the turning point where God brought people into my life, and I was actually finally vulnerable about this, finally able to communicate some of that and turn this thing around. And God, through His grace again, brought great therapists in, great narratives in. Like you've had guests on, we have this information. I read Gil Martin's book way back when it came out, but never, ever thought it was me. And that was the key. I always thought, yeah, that's other people, and I'm going to help those other people. And when I experienced it myself, it was terrifying, and I had no desire to let anyone into that part of my world.
Mm-hmm. So part of your recovery, so to speak, was seeing a therapist and going through that process. Talk about that a little bit. What did that do for you?
No, that's excellent. It's a great question as well. It's interesting because I had seen different therapists a couple different times after a shooting I was involved with and a couple other incidents that we were mandated to see. And I didn't have a great interaction there. That wasn't a great experience for me. And so I was kind of opposed to it in one sense, just overall. And I shouldn't have been. I should have been open to it. It's not a one size fits all. We know that. There's great therapists out there. I've got a great therapist. But it's one of those things where I realized that there was no way I could fix this. And even people in my own life, bringing them in, they didn't have the tools and equipping to fix this. Now, I know God fixes it. I believe God is a big God. He can fix anything, but He also brings competent people into our lives that can do it. Right? Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And so when I first finally went to a therapist who was a very solid, competent first responder therapist, that's when dots started to connect that I look back, I would never have been able to connect on my own. You can do all the reading, you can do all the research, watch podcasts, all those things. But oftentimes that therapy interaction, that relationship has the ability to connect dots that we just can't on our own.
Mm-hmm. What was your relationship like with fellow officers who perhaps weren't Christians, who even may have been opposed to or anti-Christian?
As far as when with the story,
you being a Christian officer, as you being, sure, doing your work, was there any kind of pushback from anybody around you, even higher ups?
I haven't received the pushback. I think that's always the fear that you're going to have pushback. Mm-hmm. And I think that fear of that potential pushback is actually sometimes something we have to just go, you know what, we got to set that aside and go forth and believe that if God's called me to this, then I've got to be obedient to Him and work through this. Now, there's a strategy with this. I'm not out there proselytizing on duty, taking taxpayer dollars. But as God brings people into my life, fellow officers, people out on the street, citizens, criminals, it doesn't matter. I have to be aware that that's not a coincidence. This isn't just some random day and time. This is some place that we're just kind of working through the day, even though we oftentimes think that way, and I have myself. This is truly, I believe, an appointed time that God's given us, that He's chosen for you and I to be on this planet, to be in this time and space and history, and that these interactions that I have every day, as mundane as they even may seem, are not. They're not coincidental, and I have to pray regularly. God, open my eyes to where you're at work. Mm-hmm. And I believe that as I've prayed that regularly and lived that regularly, thankfully, by God's grace again, that's how those fears of, man, what if someone gives pushback? What if I get this? Just haven't been there. And if they come down today, then I deal with it. I'd have to trust. Again, it'll be a time to trust God's timing in this and go, okay, God, what do you want? If this pushback's there, how do I respond to this?
Do you have any stories or anecdotes that kind of support what you just said? Hey, for the past several months, I've been enjoying using the Train Well program for my daily workouts. I used to be really inconsistent with working out, and often I didn't know what to do next to achieve the results I wanted. I felt stuck. Train Well has solved that problem for me. So if you would like your own personal trainer to guide you, it's actually really easy. Visit go.trainwell.net go.trainwell.net/first responder wellness. That's go.trainwell.net/first responder wellness, and start your journey to a better you. If I can do it, I know you can too. Hey, the link is below in the show notes.
It's interesting because there's been a couple. I'll share a police one first. Years ago, and this was, even though this is years ago, there's actually some recent ones as well. I felt very alone on the shift I was working as a newer officer years ago. I felt very alone in the sense that I didn't know any other Christians on my shift. I felt like there was almost a little bit of an undercurrent narrative against anything faith-based. We see a lot of people put it in terms of religion. They think of just all these rules and regulations, things like that. And we know as a Christian, that's opposite. It's a relationship with God. And that's what's so powerful. And I wanted to live out my faith, but I remember many times going home to my wife, Jennifer, and just going, man, I love these dudes. I love what we're doing. In fact, we have a great day working relationship, but man, I don't get invited here, or I feel like I just am on the outside. And it's weird because that's typically not how it's been. And I remember praying for that for a while. And eventually God started to bring some relationships in. But the big thing, the point of that story is that it wasn't until I actually left that agency and went and moved out of state and was well into my career in the Portland area that one of those officers got a hold of me and he says, man, he goes, the way you stayed the course and didn't get involved in nonsense all the time, he goes, that stuck out to me. He goes, I remember hearing you talking about being a Christian. He goes, I've come to know Christ. He became a believer. And he said, man, thank you for that example. Thanks for not jumping in and joining this mix and being a part of things that you shouldn't have been a part of. And that has always stood out to me. And that was kind of the big one for me to go, okay, moving forward, I have to make sure that I'm living out my faith. Now, I will say this too, Conrad, this is a big one. Because of some of that and seeing God's blessing in that, that is one of the reasons when I started to struggle myself, I felt compelled to hide it because I didn't want people to see it as weakness. I didn't want to see my faith tainted somehow that, oh man, he's a Christian, he's struggling, man, whoa. And I had this weird twisted narrative that way. And that was something that God really refined and worked on and changed that lie that I was believing as I went through my own recovery.
I think that's a problem with a lot of people within the Christian community is that we think we have to be perfect or at least put on this perfect facade that is really destructive.
Yes.
And so I know that I heard a story. I heard you tell a story a while back about a situation that happened on duty, and then it kind of came full circle a few years later. Can you tell that story for us?
Oh, you'll have to remind me.
It was the one where you had a prayer for someone that you were responding to a domestic or something, and you prayed for someone, and then like 10 years later, they came back and they were like, "Hey, were you that guy?"
No, that's excellent. Thank you for that. That's an amazing one to me, how God works. And again, I keep a journal of these, and that's not unique. That's what's so amazing in our lives. You see God working. When you actually ask God, okay, show me where you're at work, and you see that and you journal these things, I'll go back and find these. But that one was one that I did not remember until it came about. That one was where we went to a domestic call or kind of a disturbance call. And it was a family and some teenage daughters and all these different things. But there was an unrelated guy there. This had kind of spilled over from a neighbor to another neighbor. And so the place we're actually at wasn't really involved. They just kind of by proximity happened to get involved. And during that time as a sergeant, I don't go to a lot of calls like that. These are kind of fairly mundane. And unless it's a big call, I don't necessarily go to that. And this particular one, I just felt this burden to go. I can't describe it other than I knew God was saying, go to this call. And as I was probably 3 blocks away, another officer, because we were right at kind of shift change that was happening, another shift was coming on to overlap, said, hey, Sarge, I'll take your place over the radio, which usually a message or something like that. And that was a unique one. I was like, no, I got it. And I went to this call. All that to say is during this call, a man came out of one of the back rooms. And again, he wasn't involved in anything. He was just kind of there. And he sees me and he kind of points at me. He goes, hey, I know you. And I recognized him vaguely, but then I'm thinking, man, is it just my old man stuff in me? I'm like, I see a million faces and I think I recognize him. And he goes, you saved my life. And he went on to describe how over 10 years earlier, he had lost his mom. He was very distraught. He was actually suicidal. It was nighttime, kind of a cold, rainy night, and he was in this park distraught. And I came to see why he was in the park, which we do. We're looking at our criminal activity going on there and stuff like that. And as he started to share his story, it all did come back. I started to see the details again. I'm like, oh my goodness, I remember this. And he described how I spoke to him, heard his story, listened to him, actually prayed with him in the park, and then took him up to the hospital to get some help because he was really, really at that point of crisis. And he was even talking about, I think I shared on the one that we were talking about, it's like, you bought me snacks. I couldn't believe you bought me some snacks up at the hospital. And so he's describing that, and I couldn't believe, as I'm remembering it, for one, hearing his account, he goes, that changed my life. And then he talked about how he had come to faith and was a Christian now, how he had shortly after met his wife. They now have 2 daughters, and kind of described how his life was not without struggle. They still had struggles going on, stuff like that, but a absolute dynamic change from 10 to 12 years earlier when we were in that park together. And again, no coincidence. And again, we talked about this just a minute ago. God has put us in this place, this time and space in history, not coincidence. These aren't random little things going on. These are those moments I think God goes, okay, here, I'm going to tap you on the shoulder. You need this. You need to see that there's a bigger play here going on. Stay faithful. And those are those reminders to me. Stay the course. Stay faithful every day to this mission.
And I think I understand that you have helped start, or you at least are participating in or helping to lead kind of an area-wide Bible study or some kind of group for law enforcement.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and I was talking to my wife about this recently. We have so much information, so many resources, including what you're doing. I mean, great work that you're involved with. But sometimes we get very just myopic in our own little area. We're just focused right here thinking, okay, what's going on in my own little world? We forget how much else God is doing and how he's using people all over, even outside first responder community. God's at work. It's pretty cool. But for us here locally, we've got a Friday men's group that is a Christian men's group that we're doing a Bible study on Romans right now. And that's been such a great place for different agencies, different guys from different agencies to connect and see that they're not alone, that they have other Christian officers out there, because that was, like I said, one of the struggles. There was a time where I felt very alone in my faith. And it is so nice to see I'm not. And it's so nice to see that weekly come together in that group.
And that's in an area that's typically known to not be really open as a whole to people of faith and Christian principles.
Yeah, it's true. You know, the Pacific Northwest, still, if you look at the stats, the most unchurched, faithless group of the nation, West Coast in general, but especially the Pacific Northwest. But I've found that it's interesting that God is powerfully at work here.
Sure.
And there are more people open than I've ever seen before. God is doing amazing things here. Because I think at the end of the day, and I mentioned it the time when we were on that other call together, is that, especially, and we'll keep it with first responders now have so much knowledge, resources, and ability to implement wellness and resilience in their lives. We have more than we've ever had before. Yet we still see struggles happening. And I believe at the end of the day, I truly believe that, one, you can provide tools to people, but they have to take those tools and use them. They have to be willing and open. And I think that's part of what we're doing right here, is we're trying to break down some of these barriers, normalize some of these conversations to do that. The second part of that, though, is that there is a missing piece to every one of us, and it is God. We are born separated from him. We know that. And we need Jesus. And without that component in someone's life, I don't feel like they'll ever fully be running on that full cylinders. They may for a while. There's many great resources, there's tools and things that we can bring in to help them stay well and resilient. But until that faith component through that relationship with God is resolved and made right and whole, I don't believe you fully will ever get to that point of being well and resilient the way we're intended to be.
Hmm. So, what do you do today to kind of keep you healthy mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually?
Yeah, it's a whole process. One is that I try to not find balance. And that's interesting because I understand when people say, "Hey, I want to kind of have a work-life balance," stuff. Totally get that, and I'm not trying to overthink that. I've just found that balance is a whisper. If I balance emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally in my life, in a whisper, it's gone and out of
Hmm.
balance. Just accepting and surrendering the fact that there's constant adjustments, and that as I'm having good workouts, something else may need adjusted. As I'm having good times, reading my Bible and praying each morning, something else might need to get adjusted and factor in. And it's constant adjustments. And so I typically am just in that process of evaluating those kind of four areas. How does that look in my life? But also with that, we have blind spots, and I can do a lot of evaluation. I can let God evaluate and show me and reveal things. But that's why I have people in my life. I've got a couple different people in my life that I meet with very regularly that can specifically see if there's changes in me. They can ask me those questions that maybe I'm not asking myself, or if I'm asking myself, I'm coming up with an answer that's off. And having those people in my life help me stay well and resilient in those areas.
Mhm. So, as we start to kind of wrap things up here, I want you to speak to two different groups of people. One, speak to that officer who may say, yeah, your faith, your religion is just a bunch of BS. And what's it do for you? Look, you even were suicidal at one point.
Mm-hmm.
How's that work? How's that working for you?
Sure. I try not to convince and say, okay, no, really, it's true, it's real. Um, all I can say is my faith is absolutely real. And when someone is skeptical about that, I just say, yeah, faith in having that relationship with God on this earth is not a cure all. Your life is not going to just bring everything's better. You're never going to have struggles. You're never going to have this. No, in fact, sometimes it actually enhances and highlights that. And I believe that has to do with a number of things, including kind of that, just like the Bible says, we're in a spiritual battle. And I believe that there's different components to this life in interactions that just affect us and influence us so that things aren't easy. And really, what the Bible even talks about is that it wasn't easy for Jesus. He had moments of blessing and ease, but he also went to the cross and paid an enormous price for my sin, for your sin, for everyone's sin. And so when someone's kind of a naysayer and a skeptic, I typically don't have a lot to try to convince them and say, no, please I just walk steadily with them. I pray for them. I say, hey, cool. Yeah. Everyone's entitled to kind of their own beliefs and opinions, but man, this is something that's so central. And man, if we had time, we could sit down. I could tell you the amazing things that God's done. In fact, you're right. I was suicidal at one time, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for God. And I've been able to share those parts of it and loving them rather than trying to debate them, and bringing them and inviting them alongside to, hey, come to our study, come check out Fridays. That's where I've seen people change, because they're waiting for kind of this response of, oh, I'll debate with you.
Sure.
And, oh, you don't believe what I believe? Well, guess what? You're stupid, or whatever else. And they're not expecting, oh, cool. All right, come alongside. Let me love you and take care of you, even if you don't believe. And that's been the big one.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what would you say to that officer who is a believer, but they're perhaps not quite brave enough to kind of make that public and make that known or live out their faith on the job?
One, know that God is still working and that he will never leave and forsake you. He's promised that. Hold fast to God's promises. Even if you feel absolutely alone, you've got to hold fast to the truth of God's promises, because your feelings, your emotions during those times of isolation and feeling alone will almost feel overwhelming, like they're driving the narrative, and they are not. That is part of that lie. And encourage them, saying, you're not. That's why we have yourself podcasts like this, and then also Mission First Alliance that I'm a part of with Jeremy Wade. I know he was a guest pretty recently. That's one of the goals of Mission First Alliance, is to show regionally you're not alone. There are other Christians out there in the first responder community. There's others out there, and we've all at some level felt being alone. We have the ability with technology now and these connections that we've never had before, in one sense, to bring people together. And I would encourage them, dive a little deeper, look and see what's available in your area. Reach out to me. If someone is even on this podcast listening to that, reach out to me, reach out to you. We can connect them with these groups so that they're not alone. Even if it's just over a FaceTime or a phone call or something like that. I connect with guys from all over the country now that I've met, that we have that commonality. And so that's where I would say is that you're not alone. Those feelings are going to be there, but that's not the truth.
Mm-hmm. What can someone do if they want to perhaps start like a Bible study like you're doing? What should they do? What's a good first step for them?
Number one, I always tell people, and I know Jeremy was probably saying it on the podcast as well, is you got to pray first. I always pray for, okay, God, what do you want to see done? Because I think sometimes we get it backwards. Hey, God, I'm going to go do all these things for you. And God doesn't need my help. God is the one doing work. He's calling and equipping us for that work. So praying for that and then keeping it simple is absolutely essential. I think keeping it simple in the sense that you can overthink it and want to have this kind of grandiose, hey, we're going to have everything perfect. And life is not like that. It's messy. It's clunky. Just keep it simple. And that's what we did. Hey, we're meeting Fridays at 9. We found a place to meet. And if you can make it, cool. If you can't, no problem. We'll be here next week. And just being consistent and simple and saying, you know what? We're going to just look at a book of the Bible. We're going to talk about struggles we go through, which we do, share some prayer requests, and keep it simple. And that's what I would say is pray. And if it's just one or two or a couple of you or three of you, no problem. We know God's at work there. Not trying to get it to where our culture says, man, the bigger, the better. Let's have like 50 people there. That'd be awesome. But the reality is that might not happen.
Mm-hmm. So what gets you up out of bed every day to do the work that you do?
I believe that's another great question, because my purpose is in Christ. It is. And that God has called me to this. And every morning, very, very in a strict, disciplined way, my first hour of my day is no cell phone. It's not looking on the computer, checking emails, any of that. It is quiet time with my Creator, praying, reading, just getting into the day and thinking through my calling and purpose as a Christian. And that is the catalyst for the rest of the day, because there are days where I don't feel like going to work. I've been a cop for a long time. I'm eligible to retire. I could be like, oh, okay, I see you later. But I know that's not what God's called me to. God's called me to be a cop. And until he changes that, I need to remain faithful regarding of how I'm feeling. And that's what gets me up, knowing that God is in control of things. God has called me and equipped me for this purpose. And I am to remain consistent and faithful.
That's awesome. Well, Jason, this has been a great conversation. Is there any last words that you have for the folks that are listening?
I would just say that if you are a Christian, again, I want to just circle back to what we talked about. You're not alone. Get a hold of us. Get a hold of me. One of the best ways you get a hold of me is just through like LinkedIn. You'll see me. I'm just Jason Sery on there. You message me on there. We can connect. You're not alone. There's many groups out there meeting, praying, and equipping responders. And if you're not a Christian, you're like, I don't know about this faith stuff, man, I would say at least look into it. Consider where you are. What is your belief? What do you do? What do you believe happens when you leave this planet? Because all of us are going to die someday. What do you think is going to happen? What do you base your truth in? And look into that. That would be kind of my final thoughts. And ultimately, I believe it's faith in Jesus Christ that's going to be your purpose in your identity and bring you that wholeness that you're looking for.
Awesome. Well, we'll leave it at that. Thanks, Jason, for being on the program.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Conrad.
Well, if you're like me, you're walking away from this episode with a renewed sense of hope, purpose, and maybe even conviction. Jason's story reminds us that no one is immune to struggle, not even seasoned officers with decades of service and deep faith. But it also reminds us that healing is possible, that hope is real, and that God's grace is never out of reach. So whether you're a believer or not, I hope this episode encouraged you to think deeper about your own mental health and spiritual wellness. And if you're in a dark place today, please don't be silent. Talk to someone. Reach out. You're not weak for struggling. You're human. And you are not alone. So If something Jason said resonated with you, or if you want to learn more about the faith-based peer support groups he mentioned, check out the show notes for links and resources, or connect with him directly on LinkedIn. You'll also find a link to Mission First Alliance and other supporting networks designed specifically for first responders like you. And hey, if this conversation impacted you, would you do me a favor? Share this episode with a fellow officer or a fellow first responder who might need to hear it. Leave a review. I'd really love those reviews that are coming in. Subscribe to the show and help us continue spreading these life-giving messages to those who serve. And as always, thank you for listening. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We've got more great conversations coming your way. Please remember that you are not alone. And if you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.